Welcome back. It's time to talk about the BBI and the economy. And I want us to begin by looking at the government spending, some information that we have in as far as what is projected, but also what it could impact on the country should BBI come into effect. If you can begin by looking at that. Right, and the very first one, we are looking at the budget for 2020/2021. This is the current financial year. The projected revenue is 1.63 trillion shillings. And the county allocation that was made was 316.5 billion shillings. If you are to calculate that proportion, it comes to 19.4% against the constitutional threshold of 15%. Minimum. Then the other expenditure that the government is going into in the next financial year, according to the budget policy statement, the development projects are supposed to or could take up to 685 billion shillings. The consolidated fund services could be 115.2 billion shillings. The recurrent expenditure from the government of Kenya, that is at the top there, is 1.2 trillion shillings. Something else to look at is in as far as the budget again for 2021/2022, this is according to the BPS. The total budget is projected to be 3.02 trillion. The executive will spend 1.92 trillion shillings. Parliament will take 37.8 billion shillings. Judiciary, a marginal growth actually a marginal decline to 17.91 billion shillings because previously it was 17.99. Then county governments are to receive 326.5 billion shillings, but it has been adjusted with some funds that are moved from conditional grants to non-conditional grants to reach 343 billion shillings. Then the consolidated funds will take 724 billion shillings. Something else to look at is in as far as agriculture. These are some of the ministries which are supposed to be devolved, but there are still some functions being conducted by the national government. Some people say that the budgets are pretty high, should be taken to the counties. Agriculture, health and county, transport, all roads that are still being controlled from national offices. What else do we look at? This is the county revenue allocation. According to the Constitution, currently the requirement is a minimum of 15%. The BBI is proposing to take that to 35% minimum. But what would this mean? It would affect, if you had to take the case of the next financial year, the estimated revenues, ordinary revenues would be 1.76 trillion shillings. The county allocation, if it's 35%, would be 617.6 billion shillings. And there's a debt repayment requirement of 1 trillion shillings. And the balance you remain with 147 billion shillings, which is the money you should now use on other services and programs that the government needs to take into. And Tony, let me begin with you. I know I spoke to you sometime last week. I don't know whether your opinion has changed, but when you look at the Building Bridges Initiative and the proposed constitutional amendment bill that is now at the county level, how does that affect the workings of government and the structure of expenditure if that were to come to effect in the next financial year?
Okay, thank you. I think looking at those numbers, it shows that we are heading to a public finance crisis. Because ideally how the Constitution was designed is that you have recurrent expenditure, as you showed. Within that recurrent expenditure is also, next will be county allocations. And then the other part will be infrastructure development, those three. Those three are financed by debt and revenue of government, and that it generates from taxes. So two things are tied to those taxes, tax revenue collection. That is recurrent expenditure and county allocation. So you find that we are in a position that recurrent expenditure by national government alone consumes all tax collection. Then you're remaining with the county allocation, like last year was around 315 billion, hanging. And when you read the Constitution, it says that the county allocation is tied to revenue allocation. The revenue produced in the previous year is what is used to allocate in the following year. So it's basically tied to tax revenue. So those two components had to be together. That revenue from government should finance recurrent expenditure together with county revenue allocation. You look at those numbers as shown, recurrent expenditure alone takes the share of tax revenue. So that's a crisis that we have. So when you have a conversation about the BBI and it says that we move allocation to 35%, so you find that 1.8 trillion in recurrent expenditure, and that's almost what KRA collects. That is consumed by. So you increase to 35%, which moves it to 600 as you've shown. How do we finance that? That's a question that we need to ask ourselves. It's a good proposal that money is going to counties, but the question is, where is the money to devolve that? And the problem we ended up here is that we have not tried to address our recurrent problems, recurrent expenditure. So you find that salaries alone within government is around 41% of tax revenue. That is quite high. So the problem is that we have not found a way to restructure our public finance so that we live within our means. That's the biggest problem that we have. Yeah.
Right, and Honorable Opiyo, of course, your team has been, this is actually the selling point of BBI, that 35% more billions are to come to your county. When you make this promise, do you reconcile it with the reality that the country is in, especially on the revenue collection? And if yes, how do you propose that this be financed?
You know, Sam, you must look at all these issues in a holistic manner. First, I agree with the economist here that we have a problem in terms of financing our budget. And my friend, Honorable Kimani, who has been a chair for budget for some time, knows that. We have a problem, and I've said this many times, even on the floor of the House, that we must learn to cut our cloth according to our size. Okay? We must live within our means. We continue from year to year coming up with $1 trillion or so budget, whose financing we are not sure of. Okay? That is one. And you saw this. This was a problem with the Jubilee. In fact, Jubilee one, if I may call it so. 2013, 2018, 2017, that is. We saw projects springing up from the woodworks, roadside declarations, starting projects, left, right, and center, which projects are yet to be completed, even now, some of them, I mean. Having said that, the fact of the matter is that the amount of money that's supposed to go to the counties, which is currently minimum 15% of national revenue, is a constitutional issue. There's no debate about it. Okay? And again, I saw a mistake in your figures there. It's not really 15% of the last financial year revenues. It is of the last audited accounts, yes, as approved by the National Assembly. Okay? I'm not sure which one they applied this time round. Okay? And I'm sure it is not 2020, 2021. It is not 2019, 2020. It is not even 2018, 2019.
Honorable Opiyo, and it is not really an error.
Yes.
We are aware that, yes, there's that requirement, but you have to calculate based on that year's specific revenues. Now,
because there's this issue about 35% of national revenues going to the counties, which I've seen people canvassing in the rallies, those who are against the BBI, led by Arana and the leader of the Jubilee faction, the UDA or Takatanga. You must be realistic and sincere with yourselves. With yourselves. Because if you say that even 15% has not been going to the counties, where will the 5% come from? That is being short-sighted. Remember, and I've said this many times, when you look at Schedule 4 of the Constitution, 2010 Constitution, the functions are clearly aligned with the respective governments. What has happened since 2013, or since 2010 when the Constitution came into being, is that we have not been able, first and foremost, to cost these functions properly. Secondly, there's been a tendency by the national government to cling on to functions which ordinarily would have gone to the counties. Okay? If you ask me, then we have got no basis having Kura. Kura is the authority running roads in the cities, and Kera, which is the body running roads in the villages. Those are roads which should have been given to the counties' money. But as you give them those roads, give them the money. The problem is that people at national level wanted to cling onto these functions as a way of remaining with the power to do tenders.
So is there a structured conversation on how exactly that will be done?
That is what BBI is proposing. Well, first of all, we must create a baseline, which is at 5%. Then we go back and say which are the functions that are meant to go to the counties according to Schedule 4. And remember, we are not touching Schedule 4 of the Constitution in the BBI. Yes, it's remaining intact.
Okay.
So take the money to the counties, okay, take the functions first to the counties, follow it with the money, and we'll find no problem whatsoever. The national government can remain with a 65% and still be able to perform its functions.
I see Tony not pretty convinced by what you're saying. I'll come to you, Honorable Kimani. But Tony, why?
I disagree a little bit with how we ended it. And that's what conversation we had last time when we had that debate. I think I find it strange that we benchmark it at 35% first. Then we go back and audit what has not been devolved. And then we work on moving up. I think the best structure will be, let's start by auditing. What are the functions that have not been devolved fully? And what are the allocations that have been done? Then from there, we can say probably it's 23%, it's 24%. Then how do we move more functions? I think it would be best we start from what is supposed to be devolved and national government is still holding. And if you're fully devolving it, what is the allocation that will go to counties? Okay. Then from there, we look at what is the remaining percentage. If you're looking at 35% first, what is the remaining percentage and what are the functions that we can move down? But saying we start at 35%, then we work down first and what has not been devolved. We might find by the actually that if you audit and you do the cost auditing that is saying with the functions and the money that is supposed to go, you might find ourselves, maybe we are 35%. So my structure will be, and I think that will be the best, when we move forward with this conversation is, can we start an audit? And I think the politicians and the MPs here have the powers to ask the Auditor General to do that. You cost audit what has not been devolved and what is the money that's supposed to be devolved. All right. And then we move forward.
Oh, Honorable Kimani, are you convinced that it is actually a possibility that you can take up to 35% to the counties, and what needs to be done to make that a reality?
First, let me begin by saying there is nothing under the current constitution today that stops the national government from giving 35, 50, or even 100% of the revenues to the county governments. Absolutely nothing, because the Constitution gives government powers to do that. The Constitution says that you appropriate or you share a minimum of 15%. Therefore, if government was willing, had the political will, had the means to devolve more than the 15% or 20 or 30%, they can. In actual fact, when I looked at the BPS figures that you have projected there, you need to ask yourself, last year when there was a huge debate on revenue allocation, and you remember the fight that was there in the Senate, His Excellency the President stepped in and promised that he would give an extra 53 billion shillings to the counties to break that impasse on the revenue share. I doubt whether that 53 billion shillings is coming in the supplementary budget that is coming, because of certain realities that we must live with. The Cabinet Secretary, National Treasury, Yatani, last week, together with Devolution Secretary Eugene Wamalwa, were saying that it is indeed very possible to do these things now. So I asked myself, this Cabinet Secretary is the one in office today. He's the one carrying the purse today. He's bringing this BPS that is not reflective of 35%. If truly Yatani believed that it was possible to do 35% today, what he would have done, the budget policy statement is what will inform the budget formulation for the next financial year that starts on July 1st of 2021 to June 30th of 2022. I would have expected CS Yatani to begin in this next financial year, begin this 1st July, with the 35% of the last audited accounts that Opio Wandai has audited and had approved of, I think it's 2018, 2019, or 2017, 2018.
Yes, yes.
2017, 2018. But Yatani is not doing that today. Why? Because of the reality and the truth Tony is telling you. Opio Wandai is telling us about all the bad manners of economics and public finance. Tony Waitima is telling you about all the good manners and right economics and management of public finances. Remember, Gituku, when we were formulating the 2010 Constitution, the public finance chapter, and Waitima will tell you, is one of the chapters that took the longest time to even formulate the provisions that are there. And the thoroughly engaged, seasoned economists and bureaucrats, even in the National Treasury, to be able to come up with proposals that would be workable under the current situation that we have in the country. And therefore, what we have seen with BBI, with all due respect to the gentlemen and ladies who sat in that committee, the likes of Mzee Sei, Mzee retired Bishop Matthew, Mzee retired Bishop Jenga, Mama Leshomo, Mzee Senator Haji, with all due respect to those gentlemen, I doubt those are the seasoned economists that would be looking at to deal with an issue of public finance and public finance management in this country. I wish this BBI process had been more engaging if only it was more people-driven, then would have had that meaningful engagement to do things right the way Tony Waitima says that you should do. And we have said it in Parliament. Opio and I would bear me witness in many of the reports that I did as chair budget.
Right.
When we had, and you remember for 2 years we had an impasse on the division of revenue bill. And one of the things that we always insisted in our reports, even on that division of revenue bill, that it is time that we went down to costing functions. Tony, I'll tell you, it is only the National Assembly, the Parliament, not the National Assembly. Parliament is only Parliament that has costed functions, its functions. No, even the executive has never done that. The county governments have never done that. Parliament can tell you that it costs a Kenyan taxpayer 52 to 55 million shillings per year to maintain a member of Parliament. For me and Wandai to be here today, it's costing the Kenyan taxpayer about 104 to 110 million a year. Therefore, when we even have proposals like an additional 70 constituencies, yes, we are telling people, you know, this will benefit you because it will bring 100 million shillings in CDF to the new constituency. But you're not telling Kenyans that it will also cost them an extra 52 to 55 million shillings to maintain that member of Parliament. When you say that you will nominate probably a minimum of 120, 130 to a possible maximum of 180 nominated members of Parliament, it tells you that we are looking at another burden to the Kenyan taxpayer of not less than 13 billion shillings of recurrent expenditure. The recurrent expenditure, Waitima is telling you that the financial engineering of our public finance has a problem. And therefore, we just ought to be bold enough. I had opportunity on Sunday to pay a visit to the family of the late Simeon Nyachai. Right. And one of the things I said in the service there is that how I wish the current Cabinet Secretary and National Treasury would be as bold and as truthful as Simeon Nyachai, who once said that this country is broke. Speaking truth. And I think he was fired from the Ministry of Finance for saying that. He said the economy was sick. Those who worked in the National Treasury when Simeon Nyachai, the late, and may God rest his soul in peace, those who worked with Simeon Nyachai in the National Treasury in those days will tell you that when Simeon made that statement, said, we are broke. Like, by the way, we are more broke now than we were that time. But we have a Cabinet Secretary who is in denial. When he did that, he went back to the National Treasury and did exactly what Opio Wandai is asking us to do. Said, this is the reality. We are generating revenues of 1.5 trillion. We have a 3.02 budget. Is it realistic? Can you give me a balanced budget? And they were able to do it in 1 year. It is possible to do it.
Let us take a look at the BPS of 2020, 2021, some of the proposals that should be going into that budget. Do you have it in the Uhuru's final budget? Right, and first of all, this is what Honorable Ishong was talking about, that there had been a promise that the money sent to the counties would be 370 billion shillings to allow the new revenue formula to take effect. But the proposed allocation is 343.9 billion shillings. There's a deficit of about 26 billion. And actually for the subsequent year, the estimated or the proposed allocation is just over 350 billion shillings. Then some money has been allocated to IEBC elections for the financial year 2022-2023. This should be the election year, is 21.2 billion shillings. This is the proposed allocation. But in the allocation of 2017-18, during the last election, it was 31.5 billion shillings. And the election budget of 2017 was 54.1 budget. So therefore, questions on how exactly IEBC will be in a position to conduct that election. But maybe there will be reviews. Then IBC 2021, 2022, this is the coming financial year, 40.4 billion shillings has been proposed. In the current financial year, 4.4 billion shillings has been located, and the difference between the two financial years is 10 billion, but the estimated referendum cost is 14 billion shillings. So would that be sufficient to conduct the referendum? But anyway, it has been suspended by the courts. Then on priorities of the budget of 2021-2022 is a completion of projects, a shared donor projects. This is where the government is required to give a deposit, and then COVID-19 recovery plan. So when you look at all these priorities, Honorable Pio and I, and listening to Tony and Kimani here, you also Anthony, aren't you?
I'm Kimani Shongo. Okay. Anthony is Tony Itima.
You have another name. But we'll get to that. Yes, go ahead.
Well, Sam, and I agree that the budget policy statement should narrowly inform the eventual estimates. Yes. Even though it doesn't follow that it has to be exactly what is in the BPS. What I still believe, I'm not speaking for the president because I don't know what he had in mind when he promised the money to the counties, is that they can still find a way of bringing in that money that they promised the counties at the estimate stage. But having said that, let me just clarify one more thing before I proceed to the next one. The issue of the BBI formation and its proposals. Because I heard Kimani talk about old Wazis being in that BBI team and being unable to actually formulate financial policies, financial management policies. The fact is that Kenyans have the right to voice their opinions, and Kenyans are very rational beings, and they did so. But again, it must also be borne in mind that the BBI team had technocrats working in the background. So these figures you are seeing, such as the figure 35%, didn't just come from the blues. It's a figure which is informed by, of course, facts and yes. But that's a story for another day. The issue here is that, and I've seen in the projections, the issues of projects, which I talked about earlier on. Okay, my view is that we should not be eager to start projects just for the sake of starting them. Okay, we are struggling to meet our current expenditures. We are struggling to get monies to go to the counties. Okay? Let us rationalize projects. This is the biggest problem. And BBI, and I told you earlier, Sam, don't look at BBI in isolation. Look at it in totality. BBI is proposing very, very bold steps to be taken to manage public finance, such as the issue of dealing with corruption, which has been the biggest stumbling block to our progress in this country. BBI is addressing it by stipulating, by creating a framework or a time frame for dealing with corruption cases, if and when they go to court. Okay? You know, Sam, that this 3 trillion budget, a big chunk of it is wasted through corruption. And therefore, BBI is attempting to deal with a very serious monster.
But I would want you to respond to the question that Honorable Kimani raised, that if you are to have more parliamentarians, so 94 senators, members of parliament, the number could move from, currently it's 290 plus 70. So that gives you 360 plus as many as possible to achieve the two-thirds gender rule. So when you look at that, because when 2010 Constitution came into effect and devolution came, it was very expensive to run government. So when you go to the next extent of more nominations, more members of parliament, and more resources devolved, does it bother you on how you're going to afford this?
You know, Sam, and this is what I've been saying all along, that let's not look at these issues in a simplistic manner. You know, parliament is about representation of people. It's about representation of groups.
Which comes at a cost.
Okay? Of course, it has to come at a cost. But the issue is, what proportion of the recurrent expenditure, for instance, of an economist, is this total cost of parliament vis-a-vis the overall budget? So the issue is, parliament obviously costs us money. But we are looking at the bigger picture, because we need also to provide adequate representation of our people. The people are complaining all over of under representation. But the issue is, that even if we were to leave parliament as it is currently, Sam, and continue with the wanton wastage we are seeing all over, and continue with wanton theft, what you saw in Rift Valley the other day with the dams, with Sam Gitu, is a case in point. You see, so BBI is addressing all these issues in a holistic manner.
Okay.
Yes.
Some.
All right, Honorable Kimani.
I was getting tired listening to all this rhetoric that has no economic basis, because it's just political rhetoric that my colleague is talking about. And when you talk about the recurrent expenditure that would come out of this BBI proposal, just on Parliament alone, yes, Parliament, we say that we are only taking about 2% of our national budget. But reality is, you finance your budget from the revenues that you are able to raise. You are only able to raise half of that budget. The rest you have got to borrow. One of the greatest concerns Kenyans have today is the level of our public debt. Therefore, what you're saying that increase more of revenue expenditure is not something that is going into productive use. It's not going to, having more members of parliament will not produce more for the economy. And therefore, what you are doing is incurring more of non-productive expenditure at the expense of taking that 13 billion shillings to productive sectors of our economy that will drive economic growth and eventually allow government to appropriate even 60% of our revenues when we have more money to even the county governments and be able to do the things of PO and I was saying. Right. And that's why I said, with all due respect to the old gentlemen and ladies who are in BBI, there are certain things that you can't leave to them. Two, Gituku, we're in a situation in this country, and Waitima told you, that we are looking at a public finance crisis in this country. We're at a situation where we have just benefited from the G20 Paris Club debt suspension package. That package comes with certain conditionalities. It doesn't just come like that. One of those conditionalities, Gituku, is that you will utilize the fiscal space that you have into very areas that are of emergency nature, maybe something like the public health sector and social welfare interventions. Therefore, when we tell Kenyans that we are getting debt relief suspension and we spend 14 billion shillings in a referendum, I doubt the IMF and World Bank will agree with us that those are the areas that they intended the debt relief money to go into. When you say that we spent 51 billion shillings in the last elections and now we have 14 billion shillings this year, the next financial year we have put 20, it tells you, even if you are to give the 34 in total in the next 2 financial years, plus even these financial years, which they will not get the 4.4 billion for the 2022 election, it tells you there's still a gap. Therefore, there are certain fundamental things that we must finance in this country. Right. And that's why when it comes to public finance management, you must be very cautious on what are your priority areas. And that's why I told you, for me, as an economist also and as a seasoned accountant, I do not think if I was seated in the National Treasury today, I would prioritize BBI as a priority. I don't even think it is right for me as a leader to even be engaging on BBI as a priority for this country. My priority today would be economic revival. How do we get back people to their jobs? How do we get businesses thriving again? How do we reopen the economy for that economy to be able to grow? So that even without any constitutional amendment, since the Constitution allows me to do more than 15%, to the next financial year with a good economy, the National Treasury would have been able to appropriate more than the 15 or even 35. You can even do 50%. Then get into the issues Waitima was telling you. Go and cost functions in the counties.
You said that you would not prioritize such if you're the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary. I'm just wondering how you would reconcile that with the priorities of your boss. But Tony...
Which boss? His Excellency the President?
Wait, who would have appointed you?
You know your boss.
My boss is His Excellency the President. He's my party leader.
You know, he disowned his name, Tony. I don't know why, but Tony, because you have no problem with your name. Tell me about how do you reconcile the value of representation versus the realities of an economy? Because once upon a time, we had 210 members of parliament. Today, you have the 349 plus the 67 senators plus the speakers, comes to 418. Is that so? About
today is 416. Yeah. We are looking at the possibility of 600.
Yes. So how do you reconcile the value of representation versus the realities of economy?
Okay. The question about representation will be a political issue that Kenyans will feel they are not adequately represented. They need more representation within parliament. But the reality, and my work is to give a context as Kenyans look at that. And my context will be, are we in a position to finance such representation? So one of the other issues probably that we need to talk about, specifically on taxes, I think Kimani Ichung'wah raised a little bit of it, is that we look at numbers absolutely as tax revenue is 1.5, 1.8 trillion we've collected. But the best indicator is the tax to GDP ratio. How much are you producing from how much you grow? If you're growing more, then you're expected to collect more taxes. So you look at that indicator for the last 5 years, has been dropping. Yeah. And you look at the BPS that you've shown, it's one of the documents I never take seriously because it has become a PR exercise, that it doesn't give the correct context and the problem that we have. It puts the tax to GDP indicator for this financial year at 15.9. And the misleading thing they did is to include tax revenue, including appropriation in aid as part of it. That indicator is only taxes collected, not appropriation in aid. So if you put tax to GDP alone, that figure might come to 14%, which is one of the lowest Kenya has ever seen in modern times. In 2015, we are at around 18%, which was one of the most, quite high for Africa. And so for years, we've continued to drag. So the GDP is growing, but you're not collecting taxes at the same pace that the economy is growing. So it means you're contracting your tax base as the GDP is growing. And the problem we have with that is because you have same people, same taxpayers every year. You continue burdening them with taxes. And the two MPs here are guilty of that because they are tax policy makers within parliament. They are the people who burden Kenyans with these taxes. But the problem we have is that the tax base is the same. Every year, we continue to have more taxes with the same population. So you find a way that the economy continues shrinking. And so when we talk about representation, we talk about money going to counties and all that, recurrent expenditure, what government is intending to do. That's the context that we need to look at. Do we have an economy that is financing such a position? Yeah.
All right, and one wonders whether it is because of inefficiencies or what you're saying, what exactly is causing that tax not to grow as much as the GDP. Anyway, let's take a look at the state of the economy, specifically on the public debt that the country is currently experiencing. We have some few numbers to digest. First of all, as of November 2020, I'm basing this on figures provided by the Central Bank of Kenya. 7.25 trillion shillings was the public debt. By June 2021, it's estimated to be at 7.6 trillion shillings. The borrowing for 2022, that is the next financial year, is set at 937.6 billion shillings, according to the budget policy statement that one Tony doesn't take seriously. Debt by June 2022 is estimated to be at 8.6 trillion, and the debt ceiling by June 2024 is 9 trillion shillings. You can see how close we are to that ceiling. Something else to look at is as of March 2013, this is when President Uhuru Kenyatta was coming into office, the public debt, imagine this, was 1.79 trillion shillings. That's just near the amount that the country could collect next financial year. Then by June 2022, it's estimated to be at 8.6 trillion shillings. That has grown by 6.8 trillion shillings. And on average, we're borrowing 750 billion shillings per year in this administration. And then finally, something else to look at is the debt structure. And in 2010, that is about, is it 11 years ago? 66% was coming from multilateral organizations. Currently, it's at 38%. Bilateral, meaning country to country, was at 30%. Now at 31%, hasn't changed as much. Commercial loans, 4% in 2010, and now at 31%, and largely domestic.
Can I make one comment before I think Opio and I comes in?
Okay.
Why I tell you the BPS is something not to take serious is on the debt. They put it at 8.6 by the end of June. If you read an economics, the strategy about COVID strategy published on Treasury's website, you find that it says clearly debt is at 8.2 trillion.
At the moment?
Yes. That's a government communication.
And it's not even the full disclosure.
Well,
yes.
Yes.
It's not full disclosure.
You know, Sam.
Yes.
These figures, of course, are really worrying. And let me just start by saying that debt in itself is not a bad thing. In fact, most of the economies that have grown over the years, worldwide, have done so on account of debt. Okay? Regardless of where that debt is coming from. That's the details. The problem we have in this country is to what use debt is applied. To what use. This is an issue we have raised many times in the past. And we were never taken seriously. And now at least the shoe is the other foot. We are trying to hear voices from the other side also complaining. You know, if you look at the progression of that debt from 2013, it's an amazing story. Okay? Debt, if it went to the productive sectors of the economy, that is manufacturing, agriculture, and so on and so forth, it would actually eventually pay. Okay? What has happened is that our debt has not been applied in the manner that it would actually pay or give value to the citizens. Okay? Look at the SGR. And I was amazed last weekend when the deputy president was disowning SGR in Mombasa. I was amazed because I know that SGR was conceived by the Kibaki administration. In fact, the tendering was done and completed during the Grand Coalition government. What happened in 2013 when Jubilee came to power? They started the tendering afresh. And what happened? The cost went by more than 30% upwards. So debt has been applied incorrectly in a manner that doesn't help the citizens. I've seen the ceiling. We're almost hitting the debt ceiling, which is 9 trillion. Fine. It is us in Parliament who set these ceilings. And I'm hearing we are being asked to increase it soon. I haven't seen that. Yes, we shall deal with it when it comes. But it's an issue I think we are in agreement with most of our colleagues. So we must instill discipline in public finance management, including the management of debt, public debt. And you know, domestic debt, what it has shown there, from 4% to 30%, is it? Yes, they're about 3 or 4 years. What does it tell you? It has crowded out the local person, the people they're calling hustlers. Okay, they can no longer afford to access debt, credit from the local banks because the government is overborrowing from the banks, and therefore the economy cannot grow.
Right.
There's no way the entrepreneurs can get money.
Just before you make your statement, do we know the size of GDP at the moment? Even if it's an estimate?
Yes.
What is it?
As of last year, I think it was about 11.
So
we're at around 10.5 at June last year.
June last year, 10.49.
So if you had to take a debt ceiling of 9 trillion shillings, that would appear like an 81% of GDP.
We're almost hitting it.
Yes.
And the question of debt is not as easy as people want to make it. Two of the other conditions I forgot to mention, IMF and World Bank will give you with this debt suspension thing, is that one, you can't borrow commercially, as Opio and I is saying. It ought to be a condition. Some of the conditions they will give you. They also tell you to make a full disclosure of all your debt, including debt owed by parastatals and guarantees given on behalf of parastatals. Therefore, the figures we're even seeing here are not full disclosure of the total debt. It's much higher than we are seeing here, Gituku. What you are reading on the website is actually not accurate, because if you are to make full disclosure, we are very close, if not slightly just to hit the 9 trillion. And therefore, what Opio is saying is indeed true, that we are likely to review that upwards again. But I'm also lost when Opio and I say is that, one, let me correct you, the Deputy President was not disowning SGR. He actually owned up to SGR in Mombasa and said, had we stuck to the original intent of SGR, then it would be something that would be paying itself and would be beneficial to the economy of the coast and the economy of the country. It was projected at the time we did SGR, and it's also not true that it was tendered during the Kibaki times. It was tendered under this regime and completed under this regime. It was conceived under the Kibaki regime, but the tendering and everything else was done under this regime. It was projected that it would help the economy grow by at least 15%, GDP to grow by at least 15% at the end of it all. We got lost in between, and that's what the Deputy President was saying, when we stopped focusing on the Big Four and investing the money that we are borrowing in Big Four to take it now to BBI. Therefore, if you're talking about productive sectors, investing money, borrowed money in the productive sectors of the economy, maybe you should tell us how productive BBI will be, how increasing the recurrent expenditure by 13 billion shillings with additional members of parliament, how productive that will be to the economy. But let me say this, Gituku. The question of public debt in this country is not something that we should just look at a very simplistic point of view. It is so fundamental that the issues Wandai is raising are issues that, to me, I have said publicly, that border on state capture. And you must ask yourself, Gituku, who are the owners of capital today and who are the policymakers today in this country? Is there any conflict of interest when we, if you look at the BPS, if you look at our estimates last year and even what will come this year, a huge chunk of our borrowed money is from domestic debt. Where are we borrowing? We are borrowing from local banks. Who are the owners of the banks? And those are the ones I'm calling the capital owners. Is there a conflict of interest in terms of policy formulation in government? And I'll tell you without flinching an eyelid, there is indeed a conflict of interest. The Kenyan economy is a classical example of state capture.
Can you explain?
You don't need to look for any other classical examples of state capture.
Is that
where government policy is influenced by commercial interests. Gituku.
Whose commercial
That is what state capture would be. I am not in the business of dropping names, you know, for the sake of your station. But let me tell you, you only need to look at the state and the capital owners in this country. Then you will have your answer. One of the things we ought to do as a country is to relook, as Waitima was saying, at our budget wholesomely. And we have said this, Opio and I will bear me witness. The 3 budget reports that I did in the National Assembly as chairman and the 2 or 3 supplementary budgets, none of those reports never fail to speak about the realism of our revenue estimates. What Waitima is speaking about, our tax to GDP ratios, and what he says is actually very accurate. And why we are getting ourselves into that kind of situation, look at our revenue projections this financial year, 1.63 trillion, Gituku. 1.63 trillion in an economy that has been shut down for the better part of the year. The year before, we hardly did 1.6. So what magic are you going to employ to get 1.63 trillion? Then over and above that, you go and now start spending money on non-critical areas. Even when you get a debt, some small fiscal space of about 70 to 80 billion shillings from the debt repayment relief, instead of using that money in critical areas like healthcare and social welfare, you go and spend in non-critical areas. Are we being serious? And that's why I'm asking, probably even the IMF and the World Bank should now help this country and help our national treasury to ensure that they also abide by the conditions that come with that debt relief package. Right. Otherwise, we'll continue doing things the same old way. We'll continue sinking our country into more debt. And unfortunately, it's probably even our own children, our grandchildren, who will bear the bigger burden of this debt, the careless and reckless things we are doing to do, because we are being careless and reckless. All right. When you tell me that I should spend 14 billion shillings with BBI, spend another 13 billion shillings additional revenue expenditure to pay members of parliament because people want to feel good, to feel represented. Look at the ratios Waitiba was telling you. Look at the ratios of other countries whose economies are the same size as this, and the number of representation in those countries. We are jokers.
So, Tony, it appears like Kenyans would appear helpless, but you tell me that the size of the economy, based on latest estimates, could be about 11 trillion shillings. And the debt ceiling is 9 trillion shillings, which is likely to be hit very soon, based on the unofficial figures. That comes to about 81% of the debt GDP ratio. How far can we go? Because, again, he says that there's a possibility that ceiling could be raised.
Okay. So let's start how we got here. We had a government that had very ambitious projects, over-ambitious, and they didn't know how to finance it. And so they opted for debt financing. And we took a lot of debt for that. So the question whether we had value for money in those dates is a topic for another day. But we have two MPs here who also carry that burden and that blame. Because they are part of the policy makers who are passing this debt, who are passing these budgets, who are passing most of these policies. And so when you talk about accountability, I think also parliamentarians also are part of that they need to take to their share of being accountable for that. But we have no option but to adjust that ceiling. Because I was one of the people who believed, I think, with the absolute figure. We use an absolute figure when you're tying debt to 9 trillion or 10 trillion. Because previously, the CS will tell you it was at a percentage of 50%. We will be at 60%, and you will come in Parliament and say we are at 50%. We have not crossed the threshold. So an absolute figure gives us a target that we know exactly where we are going, and we can able to ascertain as everyone on one page that we are heading to 9 trillion. So if we talk about debt restructuring, even what IMF and all that are proposing, that debt ceiling will still have to move. The conversation about debt is not really not taking debt. The conversation should be how do we structure our debt that doesn't overburden the taxpayer who finances most of these debts. I think that's the question that moving forward, how do we restructure our debt and not how, as conversations I've had, that we need to slow down on debt. No, every economy has to take debt to finance most of their things, but restructuring is main thing.
Okay, that's what I'm asking. Can you cross the 100% GDP, debt GDP ratio?
Technically, it will be legal if you cross it. Because it's in law that it's tied within law that parliamentarians pass it. You cannot cross to 9 trillion. So if you cross it, it will be illegal for the CS. And I think they're the ones who pass the budget. So I think they'll be the one to censure the CS for doing that.
Okay, let me put it differently.
But remember, the GDP is also growing.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm asking because, it keeps growing over and over again. But if already we're at 81%, there's a possibility that we can actually get to 99, 100 plus. Would that be okay in management of public finance?
It wouldn't. It wouldn't. And that's why we're saying there ought to be caution. Even as proposals come to increase the public debt ceiling, then the National Treasury ought to be cautious. But of course, you know what they will do. They will tinker with the figures and tell us the GDP. The GDP will be higher. GDP now is much higher.
Okay. Honorable Pio.
What I need to say, actually, hopefully in closing, is that at the end of the day, what will save us, even from this burden of debts, is if we put our economy on a growth trajectory, consistent growth trajectory. There's no brainer here, really. Yeah. But how shall we do that? And that's why BBI comes in. There's no way an economy is going to grow consistently in an environment of political instability. Okay? In an environment of unpredictability. There's no investor who's going to come and put their money in Kenya, knowing fully well that every electoral cycle there will be disturbances, there will be chaos, and so on and so forth. And that's why we need to look at these BBI proposals, at least with a keener eye. Because we are trying to look at, to address this issue of cyclic these disruptions, okay? So that we don't waste 1 year after every election trying to mediate peace. Okay. And then 1 year before every election trying to politic. So 2 years are lost within the 5 years. We only grow the economy in 3 years.
Actually more. This year has
Gituku, Opio and I will tell you.
Let me finish. So the BBI has come as a punish. And I just pray that all Kenyans would embrace it without trying to look at it against the prism of 2022. Okay? We must have political stability in this country.
All right, we don't have any more time.
Allow me to just tell Opio and I, he knows what he's saying is not true. The United States of America has been very stable for years, hundreds of years, close to 200 years of their democracy. But it has taken the actions of just one leader to create instability. It has taken the actions also in this country of one leader to create political instability. It is our bad manners that we desist from. What happens is when you refuse to accept election results like happened in the United States of America, like has happened in Kenya, that is what creates political instability. Political instability is out of our bad manners as politicians. Okay. Let us all as politicians purpose to be well-mannered, okay, to accept results of elections when we lose or when we win. And if we do that, you do not need BBI. You do not need to incur more cost for this economy, an economy that is dying, if not already in ICU.
Whoa.
Rescue the economy. Reject BBI.
You say it's dying, no longer in the ICU. I just want us to take a look at some images of what the government has been up to in the last few days. These are cabinet secretaries who've been touring different sections or parts of the country, inspecting projects and making pronouncements. It's 17 months to the end of the Jubilee administration tenure, and their focus now is to ensure that ongoing projects are concluded in good time and take appropriate action. What we know is that one stadium in Wote of Makueni County, the contractor there was expelled by Cabinet Secretary Amina Mohammed, and it is the new way of doing things to ensure that
the contractor been paid?
People are accountable. Those are the images that we have. I want us to take a look at some of the feedback that is coming through to us via Citizen TV at Sam Gituku. The hashtag to use is Daybreak. If we have those, you can start by looking at Pandit Olum. You say that the Kenya's debt burden is huge, a country borrowing massively and yet looting. It is at its best. A progressive plan to take the economy back to her feet must be worked on before it is too late. I don't know how. Otieno Ambala, you say that more constituencies, heavier burden to the common Kenyan. Why can't we have a consensus, understanding, and create more production to avoid the tax burden? 2020, 2021 budget comes to a 3.02 trillion, while the government can only collect 1.6. I think you will confuse figures to the next financial year. Edwin Nyakweba, on average, we borrow 750 billion shillings. My president alluded the other day that we lose 2 billion shillings daily. That translates to approximately 720 billion shillings annually lost. That's including Christmas Day. In a nutshell, we borrow for people to steal. No wonder the tax ceiling was increased. Adere Kavins said that the center no longer holds in Jubilee. The DP is clearly on warpath with party leader in contravention of the party constitution that Ishungwa read out. In the ensuing chaos, service delivery by government is grounded. And I think that's where I want to leave it at. Two Tonys and Honorable Pio and Honorable Kiwani Ishungwa from Kikuyu constituency, Honorable Pio Wandai and Tony Watima, independent analyst. No, independent economist. Thank you so much for making time for us. We'll continue with this conversation.
You introduce him to politics, now he's becoming an analyst.
That's our time. Up next is Willis Raguru. He'll be here to talk about what we need to be concerned about with the social affairs. My name is Sam Gituku. See you in an hour's time.